All right, guys, it's just me, Mr. Plazik. What we're going to deal with in this lecture series is Chapter 3 and the end of Chapter 3, which is dealing with tissues, is what we're going to be talking about. So in the book, it's kind of around pages 88 to 100 is where we're going to be located at in the book. Remember, in our class, we just deal with the end of Chapter 3 because a lot of those previous concepts that were in Chapter 2 and the beginning of Chapter 3, you guys talked a little bit about in biology, and I don't want to be redundant and go over things that you guys already know. We kind of want to get into the actual new stuff as far as anatomy is concerned. So if you remember, guys, in Chapter 1, kind of where we left off talking a little bit about how we organize things in anatomy. And we took a look at a group of atoms, and we know the group of atoms is going to build a molecule. So we take a group of these different atoms, take some carbons, take some hydrogens, take some nitrogens, join them together. We're going to build a molecule. We take these molecules, we join them together, and eventually wind up with what we call the cellular level. And this is kind of where life starts. If I take a group of these cells that are similar to one another, so I take a group of smooth muscle cells and I join them together, that's when I wind up at the tissue level. So a tissue is a group of similar cells giving a given function. Okay, so they're the same structure and they have a function that they're going to carry out. In this case here, this is smooth muscle tissue. It's a group of all these similar cells. These are all little smooth muscle cells all joined together, and their function is going to be to contract. Where I'm going to find these particular cells is going to be in the walls of every hollow organ, with the exception to your heart. But that's kind of what a tissue is. So the first thing that we're going to talk a little bit about is the four main tissue types that are out there. We take a look at human anatomy and physiology. There's four basic tissue types that you have to know. And then we're going to delve a little bit deeper into those four main tissue types. So the first main tissue type that I have is called epithelial tissue. So with epithelial tissue, the major job of epithelial tissue is going to kind of protect, is one of its functions that it has. So its major function is it protects things, is what it's going to do. You find it lining and covering organs. So when I look at the inside of an organ, a lot of times it's going to be lined with this particular type of connective tissue. The other type of tissue that I have is going to be muscular tissue. So we have muscular tissue is the second type that we have. And with muscular tissue, it's going to contract. So its major job that it has is it contracts, if we have one word to describe it. Epithelial, we kind of gave it a function of it protects. Epithelial tissue is also going to do a variety of other things. Some of your glandular tissue is made of epithelial tissue, so it does also have a property for some types of epithelial tissue that it's going to secrete things, is what it's also going to do. Muscular tissue is going to contract, so when it contracts, it's going to get shorter, and when it gets shorter, it's going to move things, is what it's going to do. So muscular tissue is going to contract. Another type of tissue that we have is nervous tissue. And nervous tissue is going to generate electrical impulses, so it's going to communicate. Its major function that nervous tissue has, if we describe it in one word, is going to be communication. And then the fourth major tissue type that I have is going to be connective tissue. And what connective tissue does is connective tissue has a variety of functions that it does. One of the major functions that it has, though, is it joins things together, or it connects things together, is one of its functions that it does. A lot of times connective tissue will join one tissue type to another tissue type, especially like when I look at your skin itself. Your skin gets joined with areolar tissue to muscle that's beneath it. When I take a look at tendons and ligaments, those fall under the connective tissue category as well. But connective tissue is also going to support, it's also going to cushion. These are other things that connective tissue does as well. So these are the four major types of tissue that you have. You have epithelial tissue, you have muscular tissue, tissue, you have nervous tissue, and you have connective tissue. Those are the major tissue types that you guys have, and that's what this chapter 3 is dealing with, is dealing with these 4 major tissue types, and we're going to go into these tissue types in a lot more detail. So the first thing that I notice when I look at epithelial tissue is how the cells are oriented to one another. So the cells are all tightly joined together. So when I look at epithelial tissue underneath the microscope, you have these cells, and these cells are all tightly joined together, so they look a little bit like this. So I have a cell here. Okay, this cell here is going to be joined with another cell. That's 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 going to be joined with another cell. Okay, this is what I call simple epithelial, and the reason that it's simple is it's one layer. So this is one layer of epithelial cells that are here. We call this simple. We call this being simple. But you can see, guys, that this is kind of forming like some type of like a brick wall type of thing that's hard for things to penetrate or to get through. So this is that protective property of this epithelial tissue, and that these cells are so tightly joined together, there's not a lot of space between them. So it does have that great protective property that's associated with it, especially if I add more layers of cells beneath it and make it stratified. So this is what we call simple. This is simple epithelial. Now if I take this a step further and I just add more and more cells on top of one another, so it looks a little bit like this. This is what's going to be called stratified. So this is going to be called stratified right here. And this is stratified epithelial when we take a look at it. And you can see it's cell on top of cell on top of cell, but there's multiple layers. So the first thing we take a look at when we name epithelial tissue is how many layers of cells that there are. If there's multiple layers, it's called stratified. If there's one layer, it's called simple. So you have simple and you have stratified. Remember, one of the major things that this epithelial tissue does is it protects, but it also has a variety of other functions as well that we're going to talk a little bit about here.
So we already talked a little bit about the major function of epithelial tissue is to protect. So that's the first thing that epithelial tissue does, is it's going to protect. So when I look at the stratified epithelial that you can see here, it makes it very difficult if this is a bacterium or something for it to penetrate and do things like that. So that's kind of the protective property of epithelial tissue. Another thing that epithelial tissue does is it's going to secrete things. So what I mean by that is this is like glandular epithelial tissue that I'm kind of drawing on this picture here. And basically this group of cells that's here is going to produce a substance, and they're going to secrete that particular substance that they secrete. And this would be like glandular epithelial, where this could be like sweat or something that's secreting, but it's secreting some type of product is what it does. So you have protection, you have secretions, the second property that makes function of epithelial tissue itself. Absorption is another property of epithelial tissue. So it will take things in. What I mean by absorb things is it will take things in. If this was oxygen, it can absorb oxygen, take oxygen through the particular membrane itself is one thing that it does, particularly in the lungs. And then the third property of epithelial tissue, or third function of epithelial tissue, is filtration. Sometimes when you look at these particular cells themselves, you'll see that epithelial tissue has these little cilia on the surface of them that will filter out dirt and debris, especially in your respiratory tract. So if you're taking in dirt and debris, this will help trap that dirt and debris in these cilia and kick it out of your airways. So you have protection, you have the secretion property, you have the absorption property, and you have the filtration property of epithelial tissue. So those are some of the major functions of epithelial tissue that we take a look at. All right, so some of the major characteristics that we have for epithelial tissue is that the cells fit tightly together that we already talked about. With epithelial tissue, there's going to be an apical surface. That's the free surface of the tissue that's going to be exposed to an open area. And then that lower membrane, or that lower surface, is going to attach to a basement membrane that's going to attach to another type of tissue is what it's going to do. So you have an apical surface, and then you have a basement membrane that it rests on. Epithelial tissue does not have a blood supply, so it's going to get the nutrients that it needs through diffusion. That's how it's going to get the nutrients that it needs. Think about when you shave or something like that. You're not always cutting yourself when you shave. That epithelial tissue is very avascular. It regenerates itself relatively easily, so it does grow back relatively quickly. Think about if your skin gets cuts, things like that. As long as it's well nourished, it will regenerate itself relatively quickly. This is what I'm talking about, the apical surface. This is that surface that's exposed to the external environment or an open area if it's inside of your body. And then you have this basement membrane they call the basal surface. That's going to be attaching to a basement membrane that's going to be down here. When we take a look at epithelial tissue, the first thing we talked about is how we name the tissue itself. So when we take a look at this, we say whether it's simple or stratified. Simple means that it's just one layer of cells, and then stratified means that it's multiple layers of cells. So that's the first thing that we do when we take a look at epithelial tissue is we name it based on the amount of layers. So we say this epithelial tissue is simple. We say this epithelial tissue is stratified, depending upon the layers of cells that are there. Next thing that I have, guys, is that I take a look at the shape of the cells. And the three major shapes of epithelial cells that I have is I have squamous, which is kind of a flat eyeball-like shaped cell. The next shape that I have is cuboidal, and then the third shape that I have is columnar. So just by knowing these simple things, I can now say that, hey, this cell type is simple squamous. This cell type is, or not cell type, this tissue type is simple cuboidal. This tissue type is simple columnar. This tissue type is stratified squamous. This tissue type is stratified cuboidal. This tissue type is stratified columnar. So you can kind of have that conversation piece of just moving these terms where they need to go. And you could kind of draw what these particular tissue types would look like. If you know stratified, you know simple, and you know the three basic shapes of cells that we have. First type of epithelial we're going to talk about is simple epithelial. Simple epithelial, guys, is just a single layer of flat cells. It's going to form membranes. And what I mean by it forms membranes means membranes kind of cover things when we take a look at a membrane. So it's going to line your body cavities. It's going to line your lungs. If we take a look at inside your lungs, it's going to line those. If we take a look at inside of a capillary, it's going to line the inside of that particular capillary itself. On the inside here is where you're going to find the lining of that simple epithelial itself. First type of simple epithelial that we have is simple squamous. And this is simple squamous. It'll be on the inside of your lungs itself. So it's just a single layer of flat cells is simple squamous. Simple cuboidal is going to be a single layer of cuboid or cube cells. This is found, we find in glandular tissue and their ducts. So this is going to be very similar to that secretion property that we talked about earlier. These cube-like cells are going to secrete a product into a given location. It's also going to form the walls of your kidney tubules and also going to cover ovaries as well as far as reproduction is concerned. This is what they look like right here. You can see they're cube-shaped, and it's just a single layer of them. And you can see this white space that's in here. That's an open space that's here. So these cells are probably going to be forming some tube-like structure or something like that. They could be secreting something in there, or something could just be traveling through this particular area itself. But this is just an area of cube-like cells that's in, and there's an open area that's on the inside there, and that's going to be simple cuboidal epithelial. Simple columnar is going to be a single layer of tall cells. A lot of these cells will produce a mucus that's going to be associated with them. There's going to be a goblet cell that's going to be embedded with them that's going to produce this particular mucus. This mucus is going to help reduce friction and stuff like that, is what it's going to do. A lot of times we find this simple columnar epithelial lining our digestive tract. In particular, this is going to be in our stomachs right here when we take a look at it. So this is lining our stomachs on the inside. This would be an open space that's right here where your food's going to be. And then these are the simple columnar cells inside of our stomach that we have. Sometimes we have a type of epithelial that looks like it's multiple layers, but it's only really a single layer. And often, not every cell makes its way to the complete surface when we take a look at it. So we call it pseudo-stratified. So pseudo-stratified columnar is going to be a group of cells that looks like it's multiple layer, but it's really only one layer. A lot of these cells are going to be associated with a lot of this tissue type is going to be associated with your respiratory tract. Often they have little cilia that are going to be attached to them. This is a prime example right here. This is pseudostratified ciliated columnar cells, and this is in your trachea. So this is in your trachea, your respiratory passageway. This has goblet cells that are with it that are here. They're going to produce this mucus. This mucus is going to line the surface of these cells, and then these cilia are basically going to trap incoming debris. If you're taking in bad air, say that you live in downtown New York City, that's loaded with bad air and a ton of pollution and stuff like that, these cilia will basically capture this dirt and debris, and then they'll get trapped in the mucus, will also help trap it, and then these cilia will kick and they'll move it out of your trachea so it doesn't make its way down into your lungs. If it makes its way down into your lungs, that's when you're going to have that cough reflex that's going to occur. We try to prevent that from happening by having this mucus and these cilia. They're going to kick that dirt and debris out of your trachea. So this is pseudo-stratified epithelial when we take a look at. This is pseudo-stratified ciliated columnar epithelial that I'm taking a look at here. Next type of epithelial we're going to take a look at is stratified epithelial. The most common type of stratified epithelial is going to be your stratified squamous epithelial. Basically, this is going to be in locations that have a lot of that need a lot of protection, or where friction is going to be relatively common and things are going to rub up against this type of tissue. So this is a very thick tissue that you have where the cells are stacked upon one another when we take a look at them. So the outside of your skin, the inside of your mouth, the inside of your esophagus is going to have this stratified squamous epithelial cells. This is what it looks like right here, and you can see that this is one cell on top of another cell. This is going to be inside of your esophagus. So this is going to be inside of your esophagus, the tube that's leading down into your stomach. So a lot of this food hasn't been really digested yet, so it's going to have a high friction area as this food rubs up against it. And you need this protective property that's associated with the stratified epithelial, stratified squamous epithelial cells that are here. The other ones that we have stratified cuboidal, which is just two layers of cuboidal cells. You have stratified columnar, and then you have this stratified cuboidal and stratified columnar. They're extremely rare in the human body. You don't see them in too many locations. Most of the time we find these in relatively large glands of the body, which are going to secrete some particular type of product, stuff like that. But stratified cuboidal and stratified columnar are really, 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 really rare, and we don't see them all that often. Another type of stratified epithelium is what we call transitional epithelium. And this is going to be in an area that has a lot of stretching that's going to go along with it. So the cells are going to change shape based upon the stretchability that's being exerted upon them. We take a look at organs of your urinary system like your bladder. Your bladder is going to expand and contract, and this type of epithelium we're going to find in that particular location itself. So this would be your transitional epithelium that's found in your bladder. You can see if this sort of stretch out, you can see here this stretching is going to change the actual cell shape itself. It looks like these cells are all stacked upon one another, but you need this elasticity or this ability to stretch and change shape, and that's what these epithelial cells are going to have the ability to do. And we see these on the outside of your bladder, or on the inside of your bladder, lining your actual bladder itself, is where we're going to find this particular type of transitional epithelial, and it's going to change its actual shape depending upon how much fluid would be in your bladder to cause it to stretch out. We talked a little bit about glands and the secretion property of epithelial tissue. A gland is one or more cell that's going to be responsible for secreting a particular product. There's two types of glands that we have in the body. There's endocrine glands and there's exocrine glands. Endocrine glands are going to be ductless and they're going to secrete hormones. So they're going to be products of the endocrine system. So endocrine glands, they're ductless, they secrete their products directly into the bloodstream, is what an endocrine gland is. An exocrine gland is going to secrete its product into ducts that are going to go to a given location. So like a sweat gland, it's going to release its products into a duct that's going to go to the surface of the skin, or an oil gland as well inside of your body. So these are the two major types of glands that we have when we take a look at glandular epithelial, endocrine glands and exocrine glands. This image right here is that of an endocrine gland right here. And you can see the endocrine glands releasing its products directly into the bloodstream. This is an exocrine gland that's here. So these cells here are releasing their products into a duct that's going to rise to the given surface itself. So that concludes the basics, guys, of epithelial tissue. Remember, epithelial tissue, we base the name on whether it's one layer, multiple layers, and then we go into the shape of those particular cells themselves. Epithelial tissue is going to cover and it's going to line things. It also has that glandular-like function as well.